I'd like to invite Smita Rakesh, Portfolio Director of Clean Energy and Climate Action at Social Alpha. Smita is someone who really doesn't need an introduction here, and I'm sure is personally known to everyone. She has over a decade of experience working in the clean energy ecosystem, designing, implementing, and advising strategies for social impact. Smita, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Thank you for staying on this panel. We have with us today Ms. Tara Ramanathan. Tara is Director, Energy for Health at Nexleaf Analytics. Tara and her team have done amazing work on sensor technology, but they also come with a lot of understanding of what does it take to make technology for people, where technology is not the core, but is plays more of an enabling role for the communities. We also have Russell Collins. Russell is founder director of Himalayan Rocket Stove. Himalayan Rocket Stove makes integrated solutions for space heating and cooking. And Russell and team's approach, Social Alpha, is also working with them. They're a portfolio company, and Russell's approach, his team's approach, is very interesting because they're not only looking at introducing technology or sensors into the solution from an external point of view, but are also looking at integrating it in a way that helps improve their product. So more as a learning mechanism. We have on the panel Gaurav Mehta. Gaurav is founder and CEO of Dharma Life. Dharma Life has been doing and plugging in that very, very critical gap of last mile supply chain, where social impact products and products that have broken supply networks are made accessible at the doorstep of communities. They have a network of 17,000 women entrepreneurs from the local communities working with Dharma Life. And we also have Narayan Sundararajan. Narayan is the CTO of Grameen Intel Social Business, and he's also Senior Director and Senior Principal Engineer, Applied Machine Learning at Intel. Narayan, the bangles that you saw in Ramanshu's presentation, Narayan and his team have made a bunch of technologies focusing more on rural applications, but the one that is in focus, because we're talking more in the context of clean cooking, are the carbon monoxide bangles, which we believe are going to be game changing, because they are not only collecting information for our use, for program implementers' use, but are also trying to communicate with the users and empower them with the information so that they can make informed decisions, and we don't have to make those decisions and like the panels earlier were discussing, not decide on behalf of the users. So with that context, we'll start with the discussions, and just to get the stage warmed up, we had some very interesting insights from all of you. So maybe what I'll do is go around very quickly. If there's anything you wanted to add in your introduction, please go ahead and do that. But also, more importantly, if you can talk about very quickly on your approaches, how do you look at this space? I know you all come from different directions, so just some key pointers on how do you look at the role of leveraging technology for triggering not just behavior change, yes, behavior change, but also behavior change for adoption. So maybe I'll start with Narayan, you.
As I was listening to the other panel and all the discussions, the way I felt was like the monkey which put a rock in the to build a bridge between India and Sri Lanka. Really, it was a humbling experience for me. Really, kind of understanding the whole gamut of what it takes to make an intervention like this work, and particularly around behavior change, communication, stuff like that. And the rock that I'm throwing, or the rock that hopefully helps support one part of the bridge here, is sensors and the right kind of form factors that the sensors can be embedded in, that provide the right kind of information, both from a user standpoint or end user standpoint, or the sensors that can provide the data for the implementers and the donors and the policymakers and such. So that's really how I felt, and that was both humbling, but at the same time also brought forth the importance of how do we get the right kind of data at the right time, both for dissemination and for advocacy. I'll stop there.
Tara, would you like to go next?
Yes, definitely. This morning session was really energizing, and I've been really fired up to get started on this discussion. So a few points that I really resonated with. Santosh talked about the importance of reliable data, patient investment. Rima G spoke to the fact that it's not about convincing women to change their behavior, and we need to stop focusing on that. It's really about making it easy to replenish the fuel, making the cooking solution and the fuel available at her doorstep, making the solution reliable ultimately. And Dr. Swaroop asked, how do we take all these lessons to action? And she mentioned that the top-down approaches are not going to work. They have not worked. And so I wanted to summarize that because I think that links into what I want to talk about, which is about reliability. And it's a point that I'm going to keep coming back to: reliable data, reliable sensors, and more importantly, using data to ensure that the clean cooking solutions and the supply chain is reliable and long lasting for the women. And so I wanted to actually just share a brief success story, because I know that in the clean cooking space, we have a lot of challenges that we all point out. But I do want to share evidence that a good product and a good supply chain does lead to sustained usage. So back in 2016, with our NGO partners in Orissa in India, we had deployed a few different biomass cookstove models to evaluate which one women would love. And we were deploying something similar to what Santosh was talking about: patient capital, patient investment. And so we called it responsible scale at the time. So we tested the BioLite cookstove and the Greenway jumbo stove. We used sensors and we monitored usage in just 20 homes. So we didn't scale up too fast. We just wanted to see which stove would work. So after 3 months, we had a clear winner: the Greenway jumbo stove. This stove was being used 2 times, 3 times a day, whereas the BioLite stove was only being used 1 hour per week. And so we scaled the Greenway jumbo stove to 100 households in Orissa. And after 6 months, the sensor data continued to show sustained usage of the Greenway stove and decreased usage of the Chula. I don't think this has ever been seen before with any clean cooking solution in any sensor study. And so this is a success. And I share this to make it really clear that sustained usage is possible when you get a stove that is durable, usable, and reliable with a consistent fuel chain. Thanks.
Thanks, Tara. Russell, you've been talking about integrating sensors. So the same question to you: how do you look at and why do you think that's critical to the work that you're doing?
Thank you. I should clarify, I'm basically a product designer, so I feel like I don't want to overstep many more highly qualified people than myself on the topic. But from a product design perspective, and I should also clarify that I was primarily focused on space heating, with cooking as an option, and through Himalayan rocket stove. But I've also been involved with the Smokeless Cookstove Foundation with a zero-cost solution for clean cooking, more from a product design perspective, not a program design perspective. So for me, the angle with sensors, if I'm just going to narrow it down to that, sensors give me data which help me design better products. So I'm looking to basically, I'm not trying to change the behavior of the user. I'm actually trying to design products that minimize behavior change. I'm trying to get a product into the user's home that they feel immediately familiar and comfortable with. And if the sensors give me that kind of data, or give me enough, and I should actually clarify, it's not just sensor data, it's general data, some of which is derived from sensors. And a really good example of that is when we first designed the first space heater prototype back in 2016. We tried it in the field in the dark, about 30 units. The men loved it. The fuel efficiency was insanely good, about a quarter of their wood consumption. But the women didn't like it. It was too high and it didn't give enough cooking options, and the fuel feed wasn't too familiar for them. So we basically redesigned the whole unit to something that was not as efficient. It was only a 50% improvement, but the women actually love it and they use it. So now we're up to 4,000 units in the field. And just speaking to Tara's point about durability, we initially offered a 12-month warranty. We had no stoves back. We then offered a 24-month warranty. We could probably roll it up to a 36-month warranty without any fear. I think out of 4,000 units, we've had 1 or 2 units back, and that was mainly because of user error. So I agree with those points, and I guess I would just want to strongly come back to that core platform when it comes to designing the product. From my perspective, it's about making it as user-friendly from the get-go so that the user is more likely to use it.
Gaurav, you've implemented these technology options. So coming from your perspective, where do you see the criticality and where do you see the struggle?
So from our perspective, I think we have used technology, I mean, barring sensors overall for the approach. So I think the pandemic specifically has helped us. Well, the one positive thing out of the pandemic has been it's been like a Six Sigma event for technology adoption. So I think we've had to completely convert our entrepreneur network to a digitally enabled network. So it has been a kind of either we use technology or we can't work anymore, right? Basically, so that's been so. While I was always like this, but I think the great thing is on the field with our women entrepreneurs, this has been. I think we've really seen, a really quick adoption of technologies. Now we've used technology for various things, amongst them for our behavior change communication, very specifically, and this has been through social media platforms, and this was for clean cooking, but also for the kind of prevention messages around COVID, and that has worked really well. I mean, obviously there's a huge divergence depending on regions and connectivity. The second use of technology for adoption specifically has been, to measure pre-post. So we've been using kind of geotagged, images as objective data sources for, pre-post kind of assessment with some basic machine learning algorithms. So that's been fairly useful. And I think we've done this in a large study with about 25,000 households. And we're moving that to cooking now. So I think it was started with solar lighting. So that has worked well, and it's going to lead to some outcome-based products. And I think that is another way for the use of technology for us. And the third thing has been around, as you mentioned, the sensor study we've worked on in this program with the Tata Trust and the other partners. I think here it's been a learning in the sense that, obviously empowering users with data or with the bangles has and decision-making options to kind of make those decisions or see at least for themselves on what pollution levels are, has been exciting to say the least. However, I think the biggest struggle we've had here is that how do we adopt this at scale and get manufacturers to embed this? Obviously, the program has given us a lot of learnings that has been excellent to kind of drive decision-making for us. But the problem would be that how can we embed this as similar to the way the solar space has done this from a pay-as-you-go perspective, where you can measure usage, but it may not be as a financing tool, but it's actually for all practical purposes a data source and usage tool. And I feel that's something which would be great to achieve in the cooking space, also across the stack. Whether that's through ambient sensors or product-specific sensors, but it remains to be seen on who pays for them. And I think it's difficult to argue that the user should pay for them. I think or it has to be a balance in some way. So I think that's the learning here. And I think I would just say that it's exciting to see the progress, and I hope that we can do that and drive adoption further at scale.
Thank you. Thanks, Gaurav. So very important point, and let's start with that right away, is, which you've all alluded to in the introductory remarks you made right now, but also in our previous conversations, and the report also touches upon it, is that behavior change communication, or any kind of technology-based data, work has been largely centered within implementers. So if we bucket the actors in three categories: the end users, the implementers, and the policy, then it's been right now, for the longest time, it's been driven by the implementers lens, right? And whether it's the program implementers or technology implementers, us at the center, and we are shifting the gear. We're now trying to look at it from the user's lens, and some of the work that we are doing is with that perspective. So I have two questions there, and maybe I'll start first with you, Narayan, because you were talking about how your technology is looking at passive messaging, right? And so therefore, my first question there is, between having the critical, no one can deny the criticality of technology, especially in today's time and age, in accountability, in ensuring we have the right measurements, in ensuring we are improving the products and services that we are delivering and monitoring them. But at the same time, there's a trade-off with privacy and intrusion, right? Especially when we talk of cooking, because we'll bring back the same conversation to the context of cooking. More so, not just for in terms of data privacy, but also personal privacy, right? Households privacy. So how do you look at that? So starting with you, Narayan, and I'll come back to maybe the second question. Otherwise it'll be too long.
Maybe I'll start with the first question in terms of why I'm super excited about the use of technology, particularly around the use of the bangles here. I think it does three things that are extremely interesting and potentially game changing or paradigm shift here. Right? One is it is about the dissemination of information to the user at the right place at the right time. Right? I think the bangle is on person. She gets the message right there. It's not a disjointed, hey, I heard somewhere that I need to change my behavior and then come back, I start cooking. It is while you're cooking, you get the message right then and there. So it's a message at the right place at the right time. And the second piece, well, that's a real-time aspect of it. The second piece is I heard a lot about sustained messaging, right? And that's the other piece is kind of addressed, which is every time you cook, every time there's a increase in carbon monoxide, you're going to hear that beep and you're going to hear that message saying, hey, I think maybe you want to consider. I invite you to consider moving to a different place. Is a passive sort of messaging that comes in. So there's a real-time aspect to it. There's a sustained messaging aspect to it. That's exciting. The second piece is, so one is information dissemination. The second one is around essentially engagement, right? One is, it's one thing to kind of passively provide that information to the user. It's another to kind of even elicit the engagement. That's, I think, very exciting. You heard from the report that Ramanathan presented that we found that the women are actually checking while they are cooking as to whether there is increased carbon monoxide or not. That was very encouraging for me, which is the engagement part of it. The third piece is on riding on top of both the information dissemination and the engagement piece is really around behavior change. Based on these two, are they changing behavior or are they enticed to change behavior? Right? So all three of those become important. We are able to collect real-time data, not just for providing feedback to the user, but also to understand from a implementer and a policymaker standpoint as to what is happening at each of these stages. So that's from a data standpoint. And I mentioned a couple of points about the data privacy piece, which you asked about, which is, I think we strongly believe, I think there are four aspects to I see and data collection. One is collect only what is absolutely critical and necessary. Right? So keep it to the minimum. That's the first piece. The second one is be explicit and clear about what the ownership or who the owner is. That's the second piece. The third piece is even if those are true, anonymize the heck out of it. That's the third piece. And the fourth one, which I think is still a discussion to be had, is there a part that the user or the end customer can play a role in some sort of a data exchange? Doesn't have to be financial, but some sort of a data exchange where they are, as the owner of the data and the experience that provides the data, are able to take part in that data exchange. So those are the four things that I believe are extremely critical as we think about data collected and experimentation that we do based on the data.
And so on the same point that Narayan made, Russell, you spoke about yesterday about functionality and how you're looking at making sure that we're giving back. So one is the same data and insights from the data, like Narayan said, to the communities. But what else are we ensuring functionality while we're doing it? Reduced inconvenience. How do we look at that? And what else? What could be some of the financial incentives and any thoughts on that? What could we give back in return to the users that we're collecting data from?
For me, and I will speak from the space heating perspective because that's what I know best. So, and as you alluded to, I'm starting to integrate sensors into some of our programs, which I'm having to get custom made ourselves. So we've actually got our own team building the sensors because what we need to measure are 3 temperatures simultaneously with fuel consumption. So we're measuring ambient temperature outside, ambient temperature in the room, flue stack temperature, which tells us if the stove is on or off, and we have a scales which is linked to the sensor, which tells us how much exact fuel. The reason for designing a sensor that does that is because I have a hypothesis based on our customer surveys, which is we know from our internal testing that the stove reduces wood demand by 50%, but when we do the surveys, the customers are not, first of all, they don't really know how much fuel they've used or not used, let's say. But secondly, they seem to think that they're using more than that, more than 50%, less than what they would usually use. And so my hypothesis is that in Himachal Pradesh and Ladakh in particular, where they have already stockpiled wood for the next 3 years, they're not as concerned or fuel sensitive. They're somewhat sensitive, but they have like a budget of wood that they would allow themselves to use on a daily basis. And because our stoves are more efficient, I suspect that they're burning the stove for longer, which means that they're having a warmer household and probably having an increased health impact as a result. So initially, we were targeting decreased impacts on forestry, which of course we're still targeting. But now what I'm observing is that I suspect there's actually extended use of the stove over longer periods because of the efficiencies, and I want to test that hypothesis. So in order to do that, I had to design a sensor specifically for that purpose. Coming back to your question about how do we then help the user? Well, so we're in the final stages of validation with Gold Standard and South Pole for being able to trade carbon credits, and the finances that we are able to raise through that channel, we are then going to redirect into the waste biomass fuel supply chain. So the goal for us is to move our customers away from using virgin forest resources into the waste biomass supply chain, and we're going to use carbon credits to help finance that. So, and again, the sensors will help validate the data when it comes to verifying actual reduction of fuel usage. So that would be one way that I can see a direct benefit to the user.
Tara, you were making a very strong point, and I couldn't agree more on us to look back at who is collecting the data, what data are we collecting, but also who are we collecting it for, who is benefiting out of it, right? And you've been talking about how you reflected upon, especially when the COVID 19 struck. You were reflecting about how your technology could lead to sort of more of an interface, in-person interface, right? And you pulled back, right? You said that we must stop that, and therefore, any thoughts and any insights on where are we? More like an introspective gaze at, are we, who's benefiting from the information that we're collecting, and what is it that we need to change about what we're doing?
Thanks for that question. And I was going to respond to Narayan's point as well, because, and I think this will link up to your question, Smita, but if a woman gets an alert from her bangle, then she might choose to use her clean cook stove if she gets an alert that she's unsafe. And then to Russell's point, if the clean cook stove is not user-friendly, then even if she gets the alert, she's kind of stuck. You know, she can't really leave her unsafe chula to go to the clean cook stove if it's not user-friendly or if it's not durable. So it's kind of a catch-22. So the trick is, what is that magic combination of data that will both alert the woman about her safety, but then also inform better product design? So maybe marrying Russell's solution with Narayan's solution. And then to add a third challenge, how do you ensure this data is non-intrusive? So I wanted to share that. And I think in terms of your question, Smith, about who are we collecting the data for, I think it's really important that we close our eyes and think about what would we want for our own household. I think sometimes we think of the households as different than us, but they're the same. They're humans, and any of us would not want sensors in our home tracking our habits every day. I know I would not. And I think it's really important for us to stop and have that mindset, both when designing clean cooking products, designing the value chain around clean cooking, and designing any kind of data collection studies and all of that, to just close our eyes and think, what would I want for my house? And what would I be asking for? And so I think that's what me and my team were channeling during COVID, is recognizing that we really wanted that data from the households. We wanted to see the stove usage so we could get to informing better stove design and all of that, all of the dreams we had. But when we really closed our eyes and thought about what is the right thing to do, we realized entering those households to collect the data is not the right thing to do. And so it's really important to take that stance and take that step back.
Thanks, Tara. And just sort of a quick comment on what you were sharing. You're right. We are all using smart appliances, though. You know, there's this energy efficiency related smart analytics that many of us are using in many countries. We use smartphones and many smart devices. I think there's always a trade-off, and depending on what we get back in return, and therefore, you know, the comments that you all made earlier on about what is it that the user's getting back, is that they're going to be comfortable with any kind of tracking or data sharing. And as long as there's transparency and there's this sort of commitment from both the sides, there'll always be a trade-off with respect to data privacy. But how ethically can we do it, and how much can we sort of incentivize and give back in return? So completely agreeing with you. Gaurav, you were talking about, and because you've done this at scale, at the end of the day, you're the ones implementing it on the ground. You were talking about, to quote your words, how it's a logistical nightmare, especially to do this at scale. And also, if we want to use technology and some of the information that's coming from there, so essentially, I was asking you how you were mentioning how this is a logistical nightmare to implement at scale, right? Because technology is also evolving, and it's not at a very scaled up and very advanced stage. So how do you look at a little bit on thoughts on that? Where do you see this going in a few years' time? And do you see there's potential for technology to be enabling advocacy or large scale policy information or informing programs at large scale? Is that something you see happening? Because you're implementing it on the ground, and it's easier to do it at a smaller scale than actually at the scale you operate at.
Actually, Smita, it's a great question, because I mentioned that only because it actually required a lot of changes in approach at our end. I think when we started off implementing technology 5-6 years back, it was kind of, we were at the mercy of the developers or the designers, right? And of external companies. And we actually used different partners. I wouldn't quote anyone here, but the larger players or even the smaller players to help us design the technology to use on the ground. This was a very frustrating experience, because every time we went back with feedback, you had to redesign, and as these projects go, projects overrun, have to be repeated. So it was a very painful process. And the problem was that the user, in this case, our female entrepreneur or the consumer, were not. I mean, we had to repurpose software which was there, or solutions which were there, and then we had to kind of work with them to adopt it, as I think. And then this whole all changed when we decided to in-source, in-house the technology team. So then we moved into designing with our entrepreneur at the front and designing ourselves. And it required a lot of trade-offs, because obviously we are not a technology company. We can't really get the teams. I mean, with Accenture and others, we have been able to get, however, a kind of partnership model going where we have the expertise to design. And once we made that step and we set up a lab in-house, we actually, everything changed, because then it didn't become an option to do this. It was part of the strategy. And I think that shift, I mean, and also the point here was that I think initially we were saying, let's hire a CTO. I mean, I think it has to be driven from the top and from the bottom both. So that's where I think those two changes helped us change everything. And I think now it's literally, I would say, we would be a technology company and a kind of not a distribution company anymore, I think, because we're looking at using the solution somewhere else. So that's to the point of logistical nightmare. I think went through that whole process, failed, and then hopefully, starting to work a little bit better. To your point on, can this data be used, for advocacy? So I think for us, we are designing and pricing and monitoring each program with technology now. So I think there's no single program in what we're doing at the moment which has no technology component. And that, I think, to the extent where, barring all the issues on privacy you mentioned, and, the empowerment of consumers with their own data and the value of that data, and the fact that a lot of education has to be done there to achieve that, I think it has the potential. I think it's only improving. I don't think it's an option, to be honest. If you want to stop talking about the same problems over and over again, as we say so, and we finally get to solutions, we have to look at this from the beginning, and I think it will happen. The other thing I would say is, from a behavior change perspective, this is we're kind of priming the pump for these solutions right now. So it's going to change, and I think it'll be faster than most people expect.
Do you think integrating technology into the cooking product, especially when we come to the context of clean cooking, right, is that going to solve this problem to some extent? And if there's any quick inputs you have for them to be mindful of from your on-field experience?
It's not as universal. I think it really depends on the cooking side. I think I would say that I think using the same devices, what we've realized is that while I love the bangle approach, and I think it's a great way to empower the user, I mean, there has to be a way to minimize the appliances to what people already use. That's why we had to conform our kind of strategy to using the smartphone in whatever way, and whatever can be used for multiple reasons. So I think my one point would be that this technology, in a way, if it's embedded into the existing ecosystem, and that would be prevalent to use social media, despite the privacy points and whatever, and other forms of kind of communication and usage. I think that would be ideal. That's one. And the second point is in terms of obviously some things around the product itself. As I said, I think I would support the point of embedding sensor technology into the products, because as long as the user has the right to opt in and opt out, and that is managed appropriately, I think it is appropriate to do that. I think it's already in most products we do use, and I think why have a different strategy for this audience? So I think it would be exciting to see this happening, obviously with the appropriate choice, and maybe what could use privacy protocols like Apple is using, which are embedding the data on the device rather than on the cloud. So I think there's various options to do this, and wouldn't go into more detail, but I think it would be that would be the view from my perspective.
That makes a lot of sense, Gaurav. Russell and Narayan, both of you, yesterday in our pre-panel conversation, you were talking about how a good product can minimize the need for BCC, and Russell, you were saying that's what you're driving at, because why should there be a behavior change, required if we are meeting the requirements with a better product, but not having to make that difference? Quick thoughts on that.
For me, it's just a given based on my experience of implementing new products into the feedback through the Smokeless Cookstove Foundation, where we were teaching people how to make their own clean cookstoves using locally found materials. For me, that had a lot of merit because it was about empowering the user to make something that suited their own context. It's also a material that they're familiar with. They're used to building chulas out of clay, so we were teaching them basically how to make use a smokeless design using their local materials. So no technology needed for that. The technology, I guess, that we're thinking about introducing into that context is really about validating the user's experience. So, and one way that I can see how that can benefit the user is putting real-time data available on the sensor. So what I'm designing are basically wall-mounted sensors which have which are modular in design, in which we can add or subtract various kinds of probes according to the situation. So, for example, it could be temperature, it could be particulate matter, it could be carbon monoxide, could be even motion sensor or infrared, which determines if there is a user in the room at the same time as there's carbon monoxide. Because if we're just measuring CO in a room, we're not actually measuring, the exposure to the person. We're just measuring the exposure to the room, for example. So through tailoring the sensor to what data do we actually want to know in a situation. So even though I generally agree with the principle, minimize the data that we need, but I also flip the other way as well, which is get as much data as we possibly can when we're doing baselines in particular, so that we can then design products and programs that will work. What else was I going to say on that? So sorry, what was it? Just reframe the question again about the sensors, how they can benefit the user. Yes, sorry, now I've got my point. So because it's a wall-mounted sensor, and I've actually seen this in the dark where we have a sensor that tells the user in the room the temperature inside and the temperature outside. They just simply glance at the wall and they have this immediate feedback. It's minus 15 outside. It was plus 5 inside when I started, and now it's plus 15 or it's plus 20. There's a visual or conscious recognition with an actual number, which is, it verifies the user's own experience and validates their own experience of using the product, right? And now if we have that kind of, for example, we could also have lights that indicate carbon monoxide is in the room, for example. I'm kind of against alarms because I think my own reaction to beeping alarms is that I would just throw the thing outside if something was beeping at me on the wall. But if it's a non-intrusive but highly informative display that gives the user information that they actually want to know, then I think it adds value to their experience and their quality of life generally, but also their behavior around using the products in question.
Narayan, quick thoughts?
I can rattle on this forever, right? So I'll try to keep it short. I think absolutely agree, right? I mean, if you design the product right, there is no need for behavior change. So taking that thread, I think one of the things, there are two types of, I won't talk about the design of the cook stoves itself, I'm not an expert in that. But what we have tried to do, at least from a bangle standpoint, is literally take an existing worn accessory that women in Southeast Asia wear 24/7 and use it as a means to provide the right kind of information at the right time. That was really the intent, saying, hey, you don't have to do anything at all, right? You be yourself, you wear your bangle, you'll get the information, right? So that's really what the intent was, if you think about it from the flip side, right? Now, that's one approach. And the other approach is essentially around whether we need to embed the sensor in a bangle or whether it needs to be embedded in a cook stove. Those are very valid questions, right? So, but the ultimate goal here is, again, whatever is the right form that gives the right data at the right time is absolutely game. Um, in our case, we said, hey, we need to provide it in a personal fashion, like Russell was saying. Hey, I don't want an alarm that's out there somewhere in the wall. It needs to be on person. It's me. It's me. I'm safeguarding. That was the intent here. It is a personal bangle that there's a relationship to, that tells you information that you can or cannot act on. Right? So that was the idea.
Now trying to look at it about the technology and trying to see what all are we expecting from the technology to offer as well, right? Like we are expecting it to be very reliable. We would like it to be non-intrusive. We're looking at it to be informative for the implementer, have enough information for the users, to be able to with the age of internet where we struggle looking at rural applications and very remote applications where infrastructure is poor. And at the same time, we're saying it needs to be affordable.
No pressure, Smita, for the technologists here. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I was coming to you for your rant, and Tara, jump in on that. How do you see this going? Do you think, with all those expectations that we all, you've contributed to raising the bar on the expectation front, so all that we are expecting the technology to do you see that happening with the kind of cost expectation? Because as of now, most of these technologies scale up. It's supported by grant and or government funding, or through and it's at some point in time, if the market has to take it up, if it is going to get embedded into the product, the costs, or at least partially, will get shifted to the users, right? So how do you see that happening? Do you think we're living in a bubble where we are sort of creating pressure that we know in the next 5 years we can't achieve? So honest rant from the technology providers, Tara, Narayan for sure, but the two of you, because you've also dived into this, please feel free to add.
It's a great question, and it's interesting. At Nexleaf, we often laugh and talk about how parallel the challenges are between clean cooking product design and sensor product design. So after the experience and feedback from Gaurav and other partners about how the sensors were intrusive and not user-friendly, or sometimes had durability challenges, same issues with clean cook stoves. And so there's a lot of pressure on the implementer and on the designers and the engineers and everyone to make something that's scalable, impactful, collecting the data from the cook stove and from the sensor. So I think that we need to adopt, again, I go back to that idea of patient investment. I loved that. And I think we need to go to something like that, because if we want something that's customized to the theme that's happened today, is one size does not fit all. One sensor is not going to fit all programs around the world. One data platform is not going to fit all programs around the world. And same with the cook stoves. And so if we want something that's customized, that is bottom up, not top down, I do think we need to, as a global sector, adopt a principle around patient investment and really being ready to invest the money, the resources, and the time in customized data and customized cooking.
The short answer is yes, right? I do think, I mean, all products start, the initial cell phone was a brick, right? So that's the easiest analogy that we can think about, right? I call me the technology optimist, but I think there is always a path to getting the price down. That's the easier part for me, right? Because along with scale comes price decreases, and And it's a vicious cycle and it's a virtuous cycle, whatever way you want to look at it. So it really is about making sure that the technology is right for the use case, and then making sure that we are figuring that out first and leave it to the technologies to go bring the cost down, and get the right supply chain and manufacturing to go work on it. I think that's my short spiel on that.
And I think I would be optimistic as well. I think just having seen, moving from, I think, what was it, SMS apps to, if I just take the app, kind of comparison versus the technology comparison, moving from SMS to having smartphone enabled kind of AI work happening with the entrepreneurs right now in the last 5 years, I don't think would have expected this speed, no, but I think it happened, and partly internet Sati type programs have helped in this. And there's various things where, now you can kind of go into I would always say, I think this small piloting and scale up approach, and costs will come down, user experience will improve. I believe in that cycle, and I think if anything, it's becoming faster and faster.
Well, you guys are innovators and entrepreneurs, so we only expect eternal optimism from you all. Russell, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm. It's actually in an area. It's a field of technology that's actually rapidly evolving. So I do agree that I feel like now is the time to kind of ramp up the expectations with what we can get, the kind of data we can get from sensors. Even in the period, I'm quite new to the space, so I've kind of gone into it fresh, looking at the current wave of technological advances around microchips and the miniaturization of various sensor components. So I think, basically what I see right now is just the cost to put it all together is the major barrier to get massive scale of really intelligent sensors into the field. And so now it's just about how to bring the costs down. But in terms of the functionality, it's an incredibly exciting time to get into sensors, I think. And with that increased functionality, we get increased data, and which leads me to, I think, probably a tangential point, which is probably a really good time that we start talking about how we share data. Can we set up industry bodies where we can collaborate, open source the data, share baselines in particular, so that we can all benefit from the work that we're all doing in the field, because it's just too big an issue to all be trying to solve the same problem independently.
Thanks for highlighting a very relevant, critical point, Russell. As much data as we collect, we need to, put in place mechanisms and also trust mechanisms of sharing data, because we cannot go back to the same users, collect the same set of data over and over again. Okay, so final 2 minutes. If any of you want to, if there's anything critical you think we haven't talked about, or anything that you'd like to share, please be as candid as you've been through the panel. Any last comments, thoughts from any or all of you?
Repeat my my observation at the start of the panel. But I do truly feel it takes a quote-unquote village to solve this problem, and I feel fortunate that we are one small cog, an important one at that, from a technology standpoint. And the ask and the request here is this honest conversation about what is absolutely needed and what is it that implementers want. If you understand that, then it's much easier for us to kind of go figure out and go build that thing for you guys. Right? So I think that honest conversation is what is absolutely critical and needed. And as long as we kind of keep that in the forefront, I think we can do some wonderful things here.
I would just say that, from a perspective of, from our Ramanathan perspective, we have started testing more and more solutions. So I think excited about this topic, excited about, taking this forward. And actually, I think there's a question on the chat, I think, around, can the users be part of the design process? That's something we're more and more doing through our entrepreneurs, who are not finally the users, but they are the kind of the part of the same community. So I think I would be excited to test more and more solutions and open to kind of speaking to more and more technology providers to test those solutions and at least share the voice of the village for the design. I think that's the only other point I would make.
Thanks, Gaurav. So if there's nothing else to add, that's a very optimistic and hopeful note. And I'm really happy. Thank you for sharing very candid insights. And we expected this to be as provocative and candid a panel as possible, because we are pushing the envelope and we're trying to raise the bar when it comes to technology for energy access. Thank you very much.